is politics, so how the narratives persist in the political landscape and how the European integration fastens it or slows it. Our map, so University of Ljubljana Faculty of Social Sciences is mainly focused on Bosnia and Herzegovina, but as I already mentioned, we have 8 countries. We have Ireland, Germany, Poland, Spain, Kosovo, Greece, and Cyprus. Here I would like to speak about how the case studies were chosen. So here you can see that we have the criteria regarding the historical factor. We have 5 determinants. So Holocaust, communism, colonial past, inter-ethnic conflicts, and authoritarian past. In our case, we look after the Holocaust, communism, and inter-ethnic relations. And in the case of Kosovo, here also communism comes in. And those cases we believe that are relevant because they contest both domestic consolidation of the countries and the consolidation of Europe as a whole, as a continent. So here in Bosnia, I will show you 2 examples, so Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. I would just like to give you a bit of flavor of what are we doing actually. So here we are going to focus on civil war, so from 1992 to 1995. And we believe we start from the point that the troubled past is rooted in lack of common understanding between of the civil war and between the peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the biggest problem is that the politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they misuse the past and they apply their narratives only to their respective nations. So here we also see that we have a bit of slow integration in the European structures, and this is also poses a lot of problem in reconciliating the people inside in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we consider this as a risk, so as also in defense studies or in other studies. So here I would just like to give you an example of Srebrenica. So here how one narrative is completely misused and applied in 2 different examples. So here you have a picture of mournful mother in Potocari. So this is village near Srebrenica where the genocide happened. And here you have the picture of the second entity in Bosnia, so Republika Srpska. Here is President Milorad Dodik. And this is a picture of student dormitory called Radovan Karadžić. He did that 2 days after the conviction in Hague of Radovan Karadžić for 40 years. And about Kosovo, if the time will be okay. So Kosovo's troubled past in our project starts with the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and continues in wars, reoccupation by Serbia, and communist past, World War II, and with dissolution of Yugoslavia, and also the violent conflicts that we saw them in Kosovo are still ongoing from the mid-90s. So conflict discourses in Kosovo are specific because they are rekindled by media representations and can be seen also in documents, in sports, in events. And again, this is a significant future risk zone and also for the European integration. Here I would like to show you an example of Adem Ešari. He is seen as a hero of Kosovo. This is his memorial house. And here you will see the international airport called after Adem Ešari in Pristina, so in the capital of Kosovo. The interesting thing is, I don't know if you see here, but it's written in 3 languages, so departure. So the first is the language of Kosovars, and then Serbian language, and then English. So, and if Adem Ešari is seen as a hero in Kosovo, in Serbian terms, he's de facto seen as a terrorist. So this is interesting. So about the overview, within this field we are going to examine various conflictual paths by using 3-dimensional approach. So within the national setting, as a cross-national phenomenon of comparative nature, and as an expression of deeper European identity. So at this point, I will end, and if you have any questions and answers, I'm glad to answer them.
Thank you very much about the very variable information. From moderator, just one question. Yes, as you mentioned, this Bosnian conflict and the Kosovo conflict was mainly in the beginning of the 1990s. So that means that the present university students, or less than, the younger than them, they have no memory about the very severe conflict. And at the same time, yes, just yesterday, the news program reported that the Serbian president was blocked to visit Kosovo. Yes, there's also ongoing the questions. So that in your project, how do you combine the past and present? Just only the present.
So thank you for the question. It's quite important. So the past is going to be searched through the lens of history, so oral and official history. And the future we are going to dig in through the lens of journalism, so through the citizen-led media and journalist outlets, so media outlets. So as you already mentioned, yeah, the past is here, so in the mid-90s, so we have children who were born in peace, let's say, more or less, but they know the stories, they know the narratives, because it's familiar to them. So their, I don't know, grandfathers, so their mothers, their fathers fought in those civil wars, and for that reason the narrative still goes on.
Thank you very much. And I will leave the further questions for the discussion time. So I'd like to invite the next speaker, Professor, Professor Hartog.
I can ask for my PowerPoint. So I already said that. As already said, my name is Miro Hacek. I'm coming from the Faculty of Social Sciences. My topic for presentation today would be about democratic consolidation as a key aspect of peacekeeping in the Western Balkans. So today I will limit my presentation to the area of former Yugoslavia, or to the 7 countries successors of former Yugoslavia that you also see in this map. So my point of origin would be classical theory by Linz and Stepan, who are the founding fathers of democratic consolidation theories. And when we are discussing democratic consolidation, 3 basic conditions should be fulfilled. Of course, they are as basic as it gets. First one is the existing of a country. If we don't have a country, we cannot discuss free elections or human rights or anything. The second condition is that no democracy can be consolidated before the process of democratic transition has ended. So first, democratic transition has to end, then we can discuss democratic consolidation. And the third condition is the necessity of democratic rule. But beside that, consolidated democracies should also fulfill 5 additional important conditions. Those conditions are economic consolidation, the rule of law, the existence of an organized civil society, effective, efficient bureaucracy, and, let's say, relative autonomy of political society. So my presentation will analyze the processes of democratic consolidation in former Yugoslav republics in the last 27 years since the independence in 1991 happened. And I have analyzed democratic transition processes and we will test the assumption that democratic consolidation is the important condition for peace, especially in the area as volatile as the Western Balkans. And first we will look into the two most recognized indexes that measure democratic transition and democratic consolidation. Very frequently used index is so-called Human Development Index, that is so-called composite index. This means that is put together by several economic, social, demographic, and other indicators. And for the area of former Yugoslav republics, the Human Development Index from 1995, when it was first published, until the latest data that is available for 2015 looks like that. And you can see that the countries are divided into various different categories, and obviously everybody wants to be in HD. This is very high development, and you don't want to be in high development or even middle development. As you can see, only Slovenia is present in very high development all the way until 2010, and among former Yugoslav republics, basically Slovenia is separate category almost. It's currently 25th country in the world according to the Human Development Index. But as you can observe, this is not the highest position Slovenia had in the history. We were 21st in 2011. Now a little bit down the ladder to 25th place. But other former Yugoslav republics are struggling a little bit more. Only Croatia and Montenegro are currently in the very highest category of very high developed countries. All the other three countries that are internationally recognized all over the place, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Macedonia, are in the category of high development. The least successful in this term former Yugoslav countries is Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you can see, and Macedonia, who are 81st and 82nd. Kosovo, by the way, is not included into this index for the reasons that it is not internationally recognized all over the world. And the next index is even more probably important and recognized in terms of democratic consolidation. This is so-called Democracy Index that is measured annually by Freedom House organization in New York City and presented in annual reports, Nations in Transit. Here, Democracy Index is also a composed index. 7 indicators are setting up this index, and things that are evaluated on annual basis are electoral system, civil society, free and independent media, democratic governance at both on the national and local level of authority, independent judiciary, and of course corruption. And every index is measured and evaluated on the scale from 1 to 7. 1 represents the highest possible democratic processes, so it's ideal, great, and 7 represents the lowest possible level. And this index includes all former Soviet Union countries and all former Yugoslav republics. And this chart shows you the successfulness of former Yugoslav republics. Different colors are different countries, but it's here below that you will probably have troubles to see. This dark blue color is Slovenia, red color is Croatia, green color is Bosnia and Herzegovina, grayish color is former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, pink color is Montenegro, black color Serbia, and Kosovo is below, let's say, blue, light blue color. And when you are evaluating democracy index, obviously you want to be here above the Mark III. Why? As above the Mark III, all the countries are so-called consolidated democracies. Between 3 and 4, then the next group are so-called semi-consolidated democracy, and below 4 you cannot discuss democracy. Basically, those are authoritarian regimes in one grade or another. As you can see, Slovenia is again the only republic of former Yugoslav group that is consistently consolidated democracy all the way until 97, when democracy index was firstly presented. Latest data is for 2016. Three other Yugoslav republics are in the group semi-consolidated democracy: Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. And three other former Yugoslav republics cannot be considered democracies at the moment, are one or other form of authoritarian regimes. Those are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and former Yugoslav republics of Macedonia. What is also worrying, as you see in the last year or two, the trends in all the former Yugoslav republics are somewhat negative, apart from Kosovo that is climbing the ladder slowly. All the other former Yugoslav republics are dropping. Slovenia, in the latest figure, is not number one among the former post-socialist countries anymore, overtaken by Estonia in 2015, overtaken by Latvia in 2016. Slovenia is now second to third place in this ladder, and for previous 17 years we have been number one. And the second question I will ask myself, which factors influence a certain country at any given moment so that it can achieve the status and also maintain the status of consolidated democracy? This question was answered in one of the largest scale projects in democratic consolidation theory by Przeworski and other authors in 1996. And they claim those factors are democracy, country-owned assets, economic growth, reduction of inequalities, a good international atmosphere, and parliamentary institutions. And I will focus on one of those key indicators contributing towards democratic consolidation, and this is economic development and economic growth. And you can see here the table of GDP per capita and current prices in US dollars all the way from the 1991 when those countries gained independence. The latest data available is 2017, all from the same sources, World Bank data. The starting point was, of course, the GDP of former socialist Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia died in 1990, Yugoslav GDP was 3,500 and something US dollars, and you can see that Slovenia even then was quite overdeveloped compared to average of former Yugoslavia, was twice as developed as the average of Yugoslavia, and the differences only grew through the years. Now, in the latest data in 2017, you can see that the difference between Slovenia and the second most, let's say, developed country in this category, Croatia, is almost 1 to 2, and the difference between Slovenia and the least developed country in terms of GDP per capita, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina, is almost 1 to 5. The table on the bottom shows or compares the differences between Yugoslav republics in 1990, at the time that the former Yugoslavia died, basically, or ceased to exist, and the current data from 2017. And if the differences between Slovenia and other republics was back then a little smaller, you can clearly see here that the differences between Slovenia on one side and other republics on the other side just became even bigger. For instance, Slovenia to Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1990 was 100 to 35, so 1 to 3. Now the ratio is 100 to 22, so almost 1 to 5. The differences only increased. And this table shows and this will be the last table I will show you, shows the annual GDP growth in former Yugoslav republics all the way from 1990s to 2017. Also data from the World Bank, and you can clearly see that the growth rates for Slovenia and other republics are quite different, and you can see in certain periods also the growth rates or the drop rates that are quite fantastic. 1996 Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the world records with 89% growth in just 1 year. Of course, this was not a coincidence. This was the consequence of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then, what is interesting to observe is, of course, area or period around 2008 to 2014, when most of Yugoslav republics experienced problems in economic terms, the consequences of global economic crisis. Also Slovenia, but other republics even more. And short conclusion. First conclusion is, of course, we can say on this very brief research and similar research that was done, that at least one of the Yugoslav republic is stable, consolidated democracy. 3 of those republics are stable, semi-consolidated democracies. What is worrisome, of course, is the negative consolidation trend in not only in former Yugoslavia but also in Central and Eastern Europe, as there are countries that have been consolidated democracy. Now they are consolidated democracy and dropping further. Also in area of former Yugoslavia, this trend is obvious, especially in the last few years, when countries are losing the ground, are not progressing but regressing in terms of democratic development. And thank you for this. This will be from my side, and I'm open to the questions.
Thank you very much. Also, from the moderator, just a simple question. In your opinion, which framework is more effective for consolidation of democracy? European Union or West Balkan, former Yugoslavia?
I would say that European Union is, of course, motivation for the Western Balkans to consolidate its democracy, to at least begin the reform processes, to begin legislation adoption to the acquis. And without this motivation, external motivation, the democratic processes would be more difficult for the Western Balkan countries. And we would talk not about 4 countries that are at least stable, semi-consolidated or consolidated democracy, but we would probably discuss about more cases of problematic countries.
Thank you so much. So the third speaker, I'd like to invite Ms. Maya Dolga.
So thank you for the word. I will not have a PowerPoint presentation because I was just planning to have a sort of a discussion around how, firstly, to give you a sort of an overview of what the current European Mediterranean relations have been in the past, and to maybe highlight some current trends that are happening in the region so far. So we are now kind of shifting our focus to a larger area around the world, from the Balkans now to the Euro-Mediterranean region, covering also the Northern Africa and the Middle Eastern countries. So I would say that what has dominated the narrative of EU approaches to the Mediterranean in the last 2 decades and even more has been basically the pursuit of security and stability objectives. However, the experience of Euro-Mediterranean relations in general, and especially after the 2011 period in particular, this suggests that some structural changes or structural factors influence the capacity and actually also the efficiency of the EU in the southern Mediterranean area. I have kind of identified 3 such possible structural factors that have been present over the past 2 decades, and even more, not a bit more than 2 decades. that basically deceive these elusive European assumptions about the Mediterranean. The first of them being the assumption of region building, which basically stressed a workable European project to construct the Euro-Mediterranean area as a region. And such an assumption basically omits any multiple de facto structural features that separate the two shores of the Mediterranean into distinctive regions. And second, there is the assumption that the southern Mediterranean area constitutes primarily the EU's southern neighborhood, implicitly omitting or, let's say, marginalizing the roles of other regional international actors that are also present in this area, such as, for example, the United States of America, then several Arab Gulf monarchies, Russia and China, and so on, whose policy and actions, especially in the post-2011 period, were really highly visible throughout the whole MENA region, so the Middle Eastern and Northern African regions. And third, I would argue that there is an implicit assumption that Europe or the EU enjoys a high level of unity in both policy formulation and also implementation. And this assumption seems to ignore the obvious structural impediment of European incoherence. The EU explicitly refers to the existence of the Mediterranean region at the launch, of course, of the European Mediterranean process, partnership, so-called Barcelona process in 1995. And several references were here made in the text in the launching document to stress the promotion of regional security and stability, the economic development of the Mediterranean region, the reduction in the development gap in the European Mediterranean region, the encouragement of regional cooperation and integration, the emphasis on regional approach to environmental issues, and the promotion of understanding and cultural dialogue among the peoples of the Mediterranean region. In addition, despite the introduction of the European neighborhood policy in 2004 and the Union for the Mediterranean in 2008, there was still a clear reference to the existence of a region. The UFM, so the Union for the Mediterranean, as a pragmatic and operational framework for economic cooperation between the two shores of the Mediterranean, did not really refrain from describing the UFM initiative as one involving new regional and sub-regional projects with relevance for those living in the region. And these bold and optimistic statements clearly indicated that in the EU's early attempts to develop its relationship with the southern Mediterranean area, there were clear assumptions that the Mediterranean could be constructed as a region, that the EU is the region builder, and that such a region has some political, security, economic, cultural, and social dimensions. However, more than 2 decades after now, it is clear that these European assumptions on the possibility of region building were misguided. Because structurally, the Mediterranean area has never been homogeneous. It is a place of heterogeneous identities, cultures, societies, and so on. And rather, in contemporary international relations, it is merely constituted as an unstable near abroad to the European continent. The multifaceted security threats and intense economic transactions between some European countries and some North African countries have instead developed some sort of interdependencies, security interdependency, which progressively took on a regional form also. In an effort to reconstruct and further institutionalize this diverse relationship with the southern Mediterranean countries, since 2003, the EU has also been referring to this area, as I said, its southern neighborhood. In this respect, a comprehensive and multifunctional approach has been adopted in the framework of the European Neighborhood Policy of 2004, which was then later on reviewed in 2011, 2015, 2017. And the straightforward goals of the ENP are to create a ring of friends, basically. So around the EU, by achieving the closest possible degree of political association and economic integration. However, the EU's reference to the southern Mediterranean as its neighborhood, even if it's geographically apt, is a European assumption that has been implicitly marginalizing the roles of regional international powers, as I said, in the Mediterranean. And specifically after the 2011, the roles of such powers have been really notably seen and influential, especially when compared to those of the EU or key European powers. Moreover, a careful observer would also argue that the roles of such external actors have challenged the capacity of the EU to act in its neighborhood and made visible basically its many limits. It is indeed interesting to see how the EU admitted these limits in the November 2015 revision of the ENP, where it acknowledged that the EU cannot alone solve the many challenges of the region, and there are limits to its leverage. So in the past 8 years have shown that the troubled context of Arab transitions represented an open theater basically for many regional and international actors to play in, such like a playground. And those actors have mostly dealt with the region as a battlefield in which a rough competition of power and influence, of course, is growing. And such actions also undermined the EU's actions in the southern Mediterranean, which alone could scarcely meet the political, security and economic expectations of these countries in transitions. The latest report of the European Neighbourhood Policy of 2017 confirms the importance of close and fruitful working relations between the EU and neighbours. And the terrorist attacks in the EU area and of course also in the neighbourhood countries have put security issue at the forefront of this kind of debates, as well as tackling irregular migration and responding to the flows of refugees. These are all important challenges for both the EU and its basically neighbours. In the year 2016, there was an improvement in relations with the neighboring countries through new forms of tailor-made partnerships. This has included work on country-specific frameworks for bilateral cooperation in the form of partnership priorities and association agendas. For example, a deal with Lebanon and Jordan in 2016 that was focused on migration, maintaining refugee flows. And then maybe deal in Algeria in 2017, this was also focused on migration in connection with energy, and then support for Moroccan reforms in social, economic, and justice sector, and so on. A priority in the 2017 revision of the Southern Mediterranean is given back to the Union of the Mediterranean. There are several important structural limits of EU action, as I already said, in the Mediterranean. One of them is basically directly connected with the particular nature of the EU as a foreign policy actor, the multiple levels of EU decision-making process, and the fact that the common EU foreign security policy remains highly intergovernmental, render the process of seeking consensus and acting coherently very challenging. When it comes to the southern Mediterranean in EU foreign and security policy, the lack of consensus among EU member states is very notable. Traditionally, the interest of southern European member states is really particularly high, whereas the interest of northern or even eastern European member states is usually quite lower. The experience of Arab uprisings and the way the EU dealt with these issues have further even demonstrated the problem of incoherence of the EU policy towards the Mediterranean. It was even obvious that in several cases the EU members were pursuing national interests and these national interests were often even at odds with the official position of the EU. For example, if you remember the decision to take on a military intervention in Libya, this was not really something that was accepted on the level of the EU, and then several European member states decided to pursue such a military intervention under the NATO flag. And the other example would be maybe perhaps the incoherence of how to deal with the migration flow during the migration peak in 2015 and 2016. Besides the many signs of incoherence between the EU and its members, there were also other signs of incoherence among EU institutions themselves. The relationship between the 2011-born European External Action Service and the European Commission was criticized by many observers who referred to the rivalry between the two institutions. And for decades, the European Commission used to dominate all communications with the EU governments in a wide array of issues such as humanitarian aid, neighbourhood policy, trade, development, and so on. And by contrast, the relationship between the EU capitals and this European External Commission appears to lack similar trust and even depth in some ways. So So we can say that the inconsistency in European policies, declarations and actions not only highlight the challenge of unifying European policy towards the Mediterranean, but also contribute to undermining the very credibility of the EU in this area. The revision of the EMP in November 2015 came to explicitly acknowledge this dilemma of incoherence by emphasizing the focus on a more coherent effort by the EU and the member states, and by stating the importance of seeking a deeper involvement of EU member states in re-energizing work with our neighbors. It further even states that EU is more influential when united in a common approach and communicating a single message. The latest 2017 report shows that the EU explicitly acknowledges its own problem of incoherence even further by emphasizing this new determination that it overtook to make the policy more relevant to the interests both of the partners and also of the EU member states. So while the challenges in the region, of course, are really immense and really will be a challenge actually to address, the EU tries now to act more flexibly and with more sensitivity towards its partners, deploying limited resources with basically more impact. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Werner. Yes, also, yeah, it's a very stimulating discussion. Because the most important agenda, urgent agenda for the European Union is migration and terrorism. And of course, it is very closely related to the opposite side of the Mediterranean. In your opinion, even though the opposite side of Mediterranean has been excluding from Europe, from the European continent, or anyway, the question itself, it must be inclusive in the European Union. But the European Union is now excluding the marginalizing you used the term.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion?
I believe that the EU acts in a way that it suits her at that particular moment. When it finds some interest from other partners from the other side of the Mediterranean, they try to get some policy done and maybe some programs that can actually stimulate and include these partners in the European framework. However, when it comes to future problems such as migration, economic crisis, lack of employment in this region, lack of development, then it kind of acts like a bad parent, kind of pushes it away and tries to say, you do not belong to European Union, to the European idea of this unification, you are just our partner from the outside, you are the other. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And, I'd like to discuss much more later about the relationship between the European Union and the outside neighboring regions. Thank you very much. So the next speaker is Mr. Mustafa Khalidi. Yes, please.
May I have the mic? Thank you very much. I hope you are not that tired. Is it fun? Yes. Okay. Here. We don't have the pointer. Okay. Now I would like to go for a more sociologic or anthropologic approach after having a very political or policy making approach toward the security or national politics of the identity. So First of all, what is the relevance of this study to this panel? Because you all are experts, are the Balkan or the EU. I would say that the one of the main nowadays, like the security threats inside the EU are from some Islamic radical groups. At the same time, you are dealing with the migrant issue, and these are all like have their roots somewhere in the Middle East, right? So I'm trying to give you some overview of what is going on inside Iran in inter-ethnic conflicts. You might always have the picture from the Iran as a whole unity, but in fact, inside we have many fragmentation. You see that here, we don't have pointers in this. I could point. Anyway, okay. Okay, I will just show it here. So you see Iran in the map of the Middle East. It's the ethnic map of the Middle East, and it's, I would say, that the most diverse, ethnically diverse country in the region, right? And just after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, we confronted many ethnic conflicts, especially here in the western part of Iran, north among Iranian Azerbaijanis, and in the northeast among the Turkmen community there. So, but after a while, especially after the beginning of Iran-Iraq war, all these small internal conflicts kind of shifted to the by strengthening of national identity of Iranianness against the Arab invasion, they kind of shifted all these internal conflicts, except in the Kurdistan of Iran, which for 8 years after the revolution, still the region was not security-wise sustainable. So, as you see, maybe many of you don't know that only a bit more than half of Iranians are ethnically Persian. So we have different ethnic groups in different areas, and here I will focus in the after Persians, the biggest population of ethnic minorities, which are Azeris and Kurds. They are here in the western Iran and in the northwest. So Iranian Azerbaijanis, as you see in the map, they are divided to two parts after Persian and Russian war in 1823-29. And nowadays, the number of Iranian Azerbaijanis in Iran is 2 times more than in the Azerbaijan Republic. And they are maybe 3 times even. We have someone from the region, yeah. And they are talking their language is a dialect of Turkish language, very close to Anatolian Turkish. And at the same time, they are Shia Muslim, which strengthened their ties to the central government. So just in recent years, maybe since the 90s, we are seeing a rise of ethnic movement, among the Iranian Azerbaijanis, which we didn't have just for about 50 years. And here we have Iranian Kurds. Actually, this map shows all the Kurds, and here are the national borders. You see, the Kurds are not also one unity. They are divided into 4 countries, but we have many different kinds of Kurds. And in these, among these groups, they don't really understand, many of them, their language. Their religion is different, but very recently, they constructed an inclusive identity of Kurdishness, which kind of include, in political way, all of them. But in Iran, you see, the situation is much more complicated. We have at least 5 or 6 dialects. You go to the cities and they use Persian language as a mediator to communicate to each other. But at the same time, everything happens in Turkey or in Iraq. You see people in the street, they are shouting for example, Ganishli, what happens there, or what happens in the Kobani. And at the same time, we have some Kurds who are joining to these groups. But what my study is trying to investigate is to look closely to these different kinds of Kurds, and how the Kurdish identity has been constructed among them, among all of them. At the same time, while they are having different sometimes religion, different cultural practices. Like giving an example. Like here, I'm looking at 2 cities, which is one is Urumia, one is Nagada. These are the only mixed cities in the region. Mix of Azeris are here, and the Kurds. So what is happening in the region? You know, these 2 different Kurds here, they prefer, sometimes, to have much more inter-ethnic relation with Azeris than with their so-called co-ethnics there. Accusing, for example, the Kurds here are quite political, nowadays the political center of the Kurdishness in Iran is this area. It shifted through that area just after the First World War. The political part was the northern part, nowadays this part. So the Kurds here, they believe that culturally they are much more developed than the other Kurds there. So they prefer to have sometimes intermarriage to Azeris, not to their own Kurdish groups, right? They kind of distinguish themselves from the others. And, but at the same time, as I said, they feel a sympathy toward the Kurds in Diyarbakir, no matter what happens there. So we see different levels. In the level of everyday life, they are trying to, for example, the cultural differences are more important, the way of life. But coming to the political sphere, they believe that if they want to if they try to be inclusive and to be a part of this big Kurdish identity, which sometimes doesn't make any sense, would empower them, right? Would categorize them. But at the same time, we are having different opposition groups. We are having here Pejah group, which is a part of PKK, which is the pan-Kurdish group, which has the YPG, another branch here in Syria. Nowadays, Turkish government is fighting there. And we have Pejah here, right? It's the branch of the PKK. Many Kurds from this region, because they speak the same language, are supporters of PKK. But coming to the other regions here, we see that the Kurds are very close to the Iraqi, Kurdish Democratic Party in Iraq, which their demand is not pan-Kurdish demand, but federalization inside Iran and gaining more cultural rights, whatever. And you go here, these parts, they still used to, many of the youth belong to the group which was created just during the revolution, which is very leftist group, socialist group called Komele. And so what I'm trying to say here with these different parts is that we need to go and look closer to this region and to understand, for example, why one city is more potential for one, for example, political group. And by this looking closer, we could understand that how these political groups are mobilizing their political aims and getting more support from the people. And nowadays, the situation in this area is very fragile because of the rise of Azerbaijani ethnic identity there. We see the confrontation of the Kurds and Azerbaijanis. And in a way, from the security policy perspective, the central government gains from this, right? These two ethnic groups are confronting each other, and they are they are naturally weakening. And but at the same time, what is the policy of the Iranian government policy to control these fragmentations? For the Kurds, Iranian policy is different, very different than the Turkey. Like in Iran, the Revolutionary Guard hired many of the Kurds, from inside, from some tribe, because they have still the loyalty to their tribe, to be like the loyal members to the central government, trying to react as the spy inside. But in the other side, we see that again, it's different because they couldn't get any tribe in the northern part to be loyal to the central government, so they are confronting the Kurds by the armed operations inside there. So just to conclude, I would say that theoretically, I'm more into sociology or anthropology, whether we need to link these policy issues. So what I'm trying to look at my PhD, my question is that how ethnicity is being constructed and reconstructed in the region. While we see many differences, but people think that they are very close together, while they don't have many clues, keys that they are, it makes them very close. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hamidi. This question from Europe to the northern part of the Middle East, from Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and to the Central Asian countries, is the next frontier for instability. Yes, at the present moment, that's enough unstable. But on the point of the migrant issues for European countries, this is also very crucial problem. Not only the southern part of the Mediterranean. Yes, that you already experienced in 2015. The West Balkan route started from Turkey. So just my comment, and then I'd like to deepen more the discussion later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And last speaker is Mr. Akihiro Ienaka. He will deal with Turkish questions.
Thank you. Recently, the issues around Syrian refugees became more and more serious around the world, and Turkey also became one of the most important countries to think about the Syrian refugees, because Turkey has the largest number of population of Syrian refugees. So to understand the politics of the politics in Turkey, I will compare the political shift and what was changed before President Erdogan, and how that affected the mothers and Syrian refugees and the different forces. This is contents. And first, what was the traditional viewpoint of Turkey from Western countries? Typically, that one is a strong military system, and another one is secularism. And that was based on the founding father of Turkey. He's a Kemal Atatürk, and his policy was known as Kemalism. And the Kemalism is still have the strong power in the Turkish constitution and the politics in Turkey. So I will compare the 2 points. And one is Turkish traditional political regime that was based on the Kemal Atatürk, that's called Kemalism, and to the Erdogan regimes, President Erdogan regimes, and how that was changed and what was not changed. It wasn't working. Sorry. Thank you very much. So the basics, two elements of the Kemalism before Erdogan regime is one is secularism, and another one is a determination never divided again. Secularism was based on the French secular system, which is called laicity, and another one, a determination never divided again, is because Turkey was in trouble at the end of the World War I. So to make the nations as a Turkish, that was the most important thing is to keep the stable regime. It means Turkey is not so much more attractive, not so active than now, because the basic Turkish, basic development policy of Turkey is to keep the present regime, and this is not so active to keep the alliance with in a global regime. And the secular party and the negotiation to join EU has special meanings to in secularism to be like westernization, and that's not only the economical point. That is also to be a European country. That is the point of secular party. But this was not actually, and it doesn't work well because secularism is like superiors. In one side that the God exists, and other side is not. But in under the Islamic regime, the whole world was under the regime of God. So the secularism was understood as a westernization and kind of modernization, but that was not fully understood like the French system realized it as a kind of any other secular system. So, and unfortunately, the secular party doesn't reform well, so the regime has been changed to from secular party to religious party, which is called AK party in Erdogan regime. Sorry. Oh, thank you. so the policy, development policy was changed from maintain the present condition to the breakdown the same. Before the President Erdogan, Turkey aimed to maintain present condition and to be equal as a European Union, like something like that. But after the situation has changed, I mean, the situation in the Middle East, the order was collapsed in chaotic situation. Turkey cannot keep the regime in the regional areas, so Turkey have to move on to the global regimes from the regional regime before. So the meaning of joining the EU is also changed. Before the Erdogan's joining the EU in the secular regime is to be like Western countries and to be European countries. But now the meanings of that is not changing. Turkey never is not a dream or being like Western countries. But still, Turkey now, as the UNHCR report, Turkey has the biggest number of Syrian refugees. That was 63.3%. Total population is 3.55 million almost, and that's the biggest numbers. But sorry. Okay. So internal peace and external peace was the motto of the basic development policy of Turkey, but it was not totally dramatically changed. The size of the regime was changed from regional regimes to global regimes. And whether Turkey likes it or not, because Turkey became more active to join in the global regimes, Turkey international politics demands Turkey more international, important actors. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jonathan. Yeah, from me, I have only a short comment. Yes, the Turkey, of course, as you know, have a very crucial position for refugee and migrant. At the same time, Turkey is one of the key countries in the Middle East politics. But there's still, for example, in the case of Germany or France, the powerful member state of the European Union has a very classic image against Turkey. And actually now most of the Turkish nationals are reluctant to join the European Union after the European Union decided the suspension of the accession talks in 2006. But of course, as you know, the 2015, the European refugee crisis caused again this the Turkey's membership and Turkey's position for the European Union. So on this point also that we'd like to deepen the discussion later. So thank you very much. And now I invite all the speakers here, and I'd like to take the discussion time as much as possible. Please. And now that I open the question and opinion, the comment for the floor, please mention the name to whom do you wish to make the question particularly? And for the comment, the general comment, please make it short. So, I'd like to invite the question. Yes?
It might be a very general question, but I just wanted to ask a question to the first speaker. Sorry, I forgot your name. Fathers? Okay, I was interested in the case studies you mentioned. I just wanted to ask about the methodology and the tools you use in the case studies, and also like what kind of perspectives do you look at the case studies from?
So we have 8 case studies, and we take 4 fundamental spaces. We have politics. So here, in the case of Bosnia, I'm going to speak to you for the case of Bosnia. We dig into the oral and official history. We dig into the journalistics, so citizen-led media through the Facebook groups, etc. We dig into arts and culture, so the exhibitions that highlight the phenomenon of civil war, etc. And through the political dimension, so which parties are in the parliament, which parties are talking about the European integration, which parties are talking about the victimization of their own peoples, and which parties are striving for the status quo. So this is the main methodology. So we are going to see the analysis and interpretation of primary and secondary sources. We are going to dig in the tweet harvesting, etc. So it's multidisciplinary, so across the disciplines.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions. The first goes to the second speaker. I found your expose on the democratic consultation very interesting. Particularly the tools you used, the Human Development Index and the Democracy Index, and it clearly showed that Slovenia and Croatia are far apart from the other countries that you mentioned. But the question is, what, in your opinion, are responsible for, or rather is responsible for the stagnation of the other countries? Because that would be interesting for us, at least particularly for us from Africa. What, in your opinion, is responsible for the stagnation of the other countries that you measured? For the third speaker, talked about in the course of the presentation, you mentioned the Barcelona process, which was established in 1995. At that negotiation table, according to your presentation, some European countries and some African countries were there. And the Barcelona process is seen as then as an very ambitious initiative, which is said to have 3 baskets: economy, political, and security, and cultural, integration. In your assessment, in your study, is the Barcelona process meeting the yearnings of African countries that are in this partnership? That is one question. Secondly, in your opinion, is there a meeting point between the Euro-Mediterranean partnership and the Euro-transatlantic relations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So,
Okay, thank you for your question. I would say that the starting point in 1990 and 1991 was very much favorable towards Slovenia and Croatia. Slovenia had 5 times higher GDP in 1990 compared to Kosovo. So the origin was already to the advantage of Slovenia compared to other countries. Also, Slovenia had more advantages compared to other former Yugoslav republics. For instance, we had most modern industrial structure. Slovenia had a border with 2 Western European countries, Austria and Italy. Borders were open. Slovenians could emigrate, could cross the border, could go work abroad. This was not possible in other former socialist countries. And the differences not only remained such as 1 to 5, also increased in the last 27 years, partly because of the conflicts armed conflicts in other parts of former Yugoslavia, partly also because of the, I would say, flawed democratization processes, so problems with state building, problems with rule of law, problems with battle against corruption and so on. So reasons are many.
Okay, so to answer your question first for the Barcelona process, the idea two decades ago was something completely different than it is today, I believe, because in that formulation within the Barcelona process, the idea was really kind of, how to say, hard to really achieve if you would follow all of what was agreed upon. This cooperation, this harmonization, this homogeneity of the entire region. They were talking about a region, so like a distinct, geographically distinct area where there would be some common values, common norms, common economic space, common political space, and so on. However, as it turned out, through the development, not all countries were so keen into developing such an area, due to the fact that they saw their own interests as something opposite to those that were trying to be portrayed in this idea of the Barcelona process. So, in my opinion, this Barcelona process failed in this way. It was not successful. I would not deem it as being successful. It was an idea, and some of the remains of the idea are still found today in some of the priorities that are given to this region and some of the programs that are trying to be fulfilled. However, the idea of the region as a distinct entity, I think it's not possible in this today's world, at least, where the southern Mediterranean is always perceived as something that is other than Europe. So even either in the cultural sense or in political or even economic sense, it is seen in some cases also as a threat. So this would be my answer to your first question. And for the second question, for the Euro transatlantic project, I would say that the EU is somewhat more keen towards this idea of the Euro transatlantic connections. It sees, I think, more interest there and more possibilities for it to get maybe more prosperity and so on in comparison to the Barcelona process, in my opinion. So.
Just a follow-up to...
Yes, please. Very brief.
Well, you will understand that I'm speaking as an African.
Yes, I understand.
Can we then say that the Barcelona process is not quite successful because there was unequal partnership, or that the European partner, the European partner found the Euro transatlantic relations more important, more significant, a better tool to advance global politics.
Yes.
And therefore, the African partners in that relation, did not actually matter. I don't know. Is that your view?
Not exactly. I mean, I would say that if you look at the history of the European-Mediterranean relations, you always see that the EU is kind of playing the role of the father in its own policies and documents regarding the Mediterranean, like a father to the southern shores. So it's kind of this paternal relationship. It's been recreated over and over again, even in the naming of this of the European neighborhood policy for this site, which is named as Southern Partnership. So even this is kind of giving that pat on the back we are your something above you, and you are the other that we are talking about. So this is the official. I mean, for me, this is the view I see. So, and this is complete. I mean, this is being recreated over and over again, maybe just in different words or different priorities. But yeah, as you said, I think that the global interests of EU are kind of shifting towards the transatlantic more than towards Africa. And as you already know, China is really starting to get, I mean, the biggest one in Africa anyway. So they are kind of pushing it in because they see that it's possible. So yeah.
Thank you. So, please. If you don't mind, please mention your affiliation.
Yeah, my name is Nina Page. I come from the University of Ljubljana from the Faculty of Social Sciences.
Thank you very much. And I have two questions actually. I really liked a really good presentation, Mr. Kochan. I have actually just a small question. When you're considering, so you mentioned that you will have 4 public spheres that you will be considering: history, politics. And when you will be researching politics, how will you be investigating basically the influence of the king countries of the nation? So, for example, the influence of Croatian politics on the Croats that are one of the constituent nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, how will you consider these aspects, for example, from Serbia, from Croatia, and so on? And a question for Ms. Dolina. You mentioned, so EU wants to act as a global player, but has internal differences that basically cause the lack of consensus in foreign policy decision making, and that in that way they make it less effective. If we take this to the case of conflict prevention, we can remember Libya or Kosovo, for example, that is not recognized by 5 EU member states, and that makes it peace building less effective. So my question would be, actually, what would be the policy prescription? Should the EU only tackle the issues that they have a consensual stance on? Or how, so in what way should they tackle global issues if the EU wants to be a global player, yeah, to make it more effective? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. The relations between, or the influence of Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is in our case tracked back from the independent state of Croatia. So we start here in 1943 ongoing. And now, at this point, we are looking about the political manifesto. So this is the first part. So both in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, and also inside the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are digging into the manifestos of the Croatian parties, so mainly the HDZ, the biggest party in the Republic of Croatia, and through the media. So what are the discourses, so what the key political stakeholders are speaking, if they want the third entity, and so on. So we are trying to see those external influences in the journalistic part, so in the media, and not just through the arts and exhibitions, but for that reason we have 4 fundamental spaces.
So to your question about the EU act as a global player, I would say, of course, it has to tackle issues that don't have consensus, of course. I mean, the EU, as you know, has the global strategy, so, and they, at least in this strategy, they outline some of the ideas, I mean, not ideas, but some of the things they deem as appropriate for a certain conflict. So at least this should be followed, and of course there needs to be a discussion within the EU for every issue that needs to be tackled. And the largest possible consensus, of course, is to be sought, but this is very hard because of this diversity of different national interests, international interests, and so on. So definitely, I would not say that only focus on the things that you have have a consensus. I don't believe that there is actually an issue that you have a consensus total in the European Union.
Thank you. So, Theo. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Izdorin Jekovic from the University of Oxford. I'm a DPhil student in history, so I apologize for any historical lessons. For Faris Kocan, my question is, so Ernest Renan had this famous lecture in 1882, Qu'est-ce que c'est la nation? And he actually argued that similar to remembering the past, it's also about forgetting the past. So how much would you say, considering your project is named Repast, would this part of forgetting actually had a value in this region in particular? And for Ms. Dolinar, similar question, actually, because the colonial past of the Mediterranean region it was actually the most developed region in this part of the world until the Middle Ages, and then it slowly shifted to the Atlantic world. And this, how do I say, identity of Mare Nostrum, Roman identity, was actually reinvigorated by Mussolini. Is this still present in this area, and is it seen like a country effect by the northern African nations? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So I think that you cannot forget about the past, but in our case, or in the case of the European continent as a whole, the problem is that you have so much different narratives inside one conflictual, troubled past. For example, in Bosnia, you have 2 or 3 narratives, or maybe 5 or 6. If you know what I mean, it's not in our point of view, or in our case, it's not about forgetting the past. It's about the bridging. So, learn how to live together. We don't assume that, I don't know, for example, the Bosniaks or the Bosnian Serbs or the Bosnian Croats are going to forget about the narrative, but it's important to have the common narrative, so as in Europe as a whole. So if you have a common narrative, you can live together. You won't ever forget about the conflict, in my opinion.
Okay, so regarding the colonial past, I would say that it's still alive within the Arab world, at least. Its influences how Arab countries are actually viewing the actions of the EU even today, and they keep reinterpreting it in the line of through this history that they had with them in the past. So this would be my answer.
And now I'd like to invite some questions for other speakers. Yes, please.
And now we have a very interesting comment and question. One is Akihiro Enaka mentioned in his presentation, is Turkey invader or mediator in the Syrian conflict? Actually, I am really, really surprised to see invader in the title, and I would like to provide my own view and my own response. Actually, definitely, Turkey is a mediator in the region. Turkey acts because of its own territorial integrity. If the Turkey will not act on time, then future it will be so late in terms of Turkey in territorial integrity. And Turkey has done a lot of things in order to achieve at least peaceful negotiation in its border countries. And Turkey is very interested in achieving peaceful solution of all these countries. If we look at a lot of different data, for instance, military air forces, and the major number of military air forces are not belong to Turkey. And you will see that there are so many other countries who has more military power in that conflict. And I am very interested, while you are putting such type of phrase, let's say invader, did you find any evidences that related with calling Turkey kind of invader? Have you find any evidence related with invasion? It's for my interest to know. And I will have second question, but after responding, I will address second question another speaker.
Thank you for the point. Our Turkey is in very serious situation, and a lot of countries, especially Western countries, sometimes criticize Turkey as a like new Ottomanism, kind of that. New Ottomanism.
Neo-Ottomanism.
Do you have any evidence that proves that this is kind of new Ottomanism? Evidence, any fact that prove such type of approach? Because it's one of the country who opened its border for Syrian refugees, and the country accepts 3.5 million refugees. How we can
in my opinion, I support Turkey. I'm sorry. As from the Islamic kind of humanitarian kind of because Turkey now accepting 3.55 million of refugees, but this costs a lot of money. But so from the like benefit or not, this is not the benefit for Turkey. But Turkey still accept Muslim number of refugees because they don't have a home, they don't have a food, they don't have any kind of connections in a long hard way. So this is really hard. But in my opinion, I support Turkey's accepting Muslim number of Syrian refugees because there is no clear benefit for Turkey now.
My question was related, do you have more facts that can be related to invasion? Because it's really very hard word that it makes me question this.
Syria, right? We cannot
What do you think as an expert, as a neutral expert? Is it a Turkey invader or mediator?
I think Turkey will be a mediator.
Now I can relax a little bit. And second question is, I would like to address to Mustafa Khalili regarding with Balkanization and application of Balkanization to the Iran, for instance. Did you find any interesting key features that can be applied from Balkanization case in order to achieve regional stability in this territory? Any specific feature related to Balkanization to apply in the territory to achieve regional stability?
Well, it's quite a difficult question. I wanted to make sort of connect my research to this conference. So I really cannot say that the case is very similar, or it's I would prefer to use Balkanization as a common term that with connotation of the separation and small countries. So it's very difficult in case of Iran if we talk about if such a phenomenon happens in that region, would we have the better future like these small countries like Balkan? I don't think so. I think that we are having more than enough troubles in the Middle East, and by happening of Balkanization, probably it would be difficult. But one point I didn't have time to add is nowadays the activists have quite big influence inside the EU. I mean the political refugees, especially from the Kurd, they are making a Kurdishness discourse, and it's by getting funds from different organizations, I believe that they are adding more fuel to the current situation. So from an internal perspective, I would say that we really need to understand the current situation first, then try to suggest some suggestions. That's what not happened in Afghanistan, not happened in Syria, Iraq. They just started to big policy making things without studying the real social problems. And now we see many small groups are rising, and all the scholars are, oh, what the hell is this group? What are they asking for? So,
thank you. So,
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very nice presentations. I'm Marika Jolley from University of Sussex in Brighton, and also member of Balkans and Europe Policy Advisory Group. This is a question to the whole panel. So because the title of this panel is Conflict Prevention, Peace Building and Mediation, I was wondering if you could make comments related or give your views to actually about how you see potential for peace building or mediation in the case studies that you presented to us today. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. In the case of Bosnia, or in the case of Balkan Consortium, I would say that this is the process, the conflict is still ongoing, so we still didn't achieve the state of peace. And in Bosnia, for example, the mediation should be achieved in order to integrate Bosnia, so the Bosnian structures inside the European integration. So in this point, in our case, that's the most important thing. So the mediation and how to bridge this conflictual, troubled past in order to build a better future for the Western Balkan states.
maybe it might be the interesting because I myself come from Japan, not inside Europe, not inside the West. But from my view, the most urgent agenda relating to Europe, for example, the terrorism or the migration, the discordance among the, for example, European Union member states is very serious. Yeah, that means that the perception gaps against the migration, for example. Yes, even in one country, member state, like in Germany, like in Sweden, the last night in the election result said, such a discordance is becoming more and more dangerous point. And I'd like to ask the other participants from all four, welcome. So how can you reintegrate about the perceptions against such the most urgent agenda? Or is it inevitable to widen gaps? But of course, it's very dangerous for the further integration of the European Union. So I'd like to invite some of you. From you? Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the very relevant question or comment. I would say that, like, in my own study, I think that nowadays the main players in the region, as I explained, like, are the big powers, right, which are trying to influence their regional small parties by, like, supporting them. But the main problem which stops us to reach to sustainable security is that I believe that we don't start from the ground, but from political lobbies. So that's why, we are giving more power to some group, and then later we see the consequences, because we don't know what is happening in the ground. And for the Professor Naito's comment or question, I believe that in the reality, it's very difficult to reach to some sources of the kind of agreement, especially in some vulnerable areas like Balkan or more in the Middle East, because each big power has their own interest. It's easy here to talk, to throw some big words and be hopeful, but I think that in reality, it's very complex, complicated, and we should only look for to maintain the current situation than hoping for making it very, very better in the near future. So maybe I'm so pessimist.
Again, I open the question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My name is Nima Grasic, and I come from the Office of the President of the Republic. My question would actually be a sub-question of your comment, specifically to Professor Hacek. I very much appreciated your presentation of the Democracy Index, but the data were until 2016, as is always the problem with data. So maybe your comment on the recent developments, specifically maybe to former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. I think we can see a development in this area for the last 2 years, especially considering the EU relations and NATO relations, and maybe your comment on these recent developments, and is this a new momentum for democratization of the Western Balkans? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. We could connect your question to the comments of Professor Naito before. This is the case of such a conflict and such a situation that is now, after 26 years almost, the solution has presented in Macedonia to break up from the conflict of the neighboring Greece over the name of the country. As we see on the both sides, there are protests, there are riots on the Greece side and on the Macedonian side. And we will have the referendum upcoming in the following months, and after the referendum we will still need 2/3 majority in the Macedonian parliament. As we know, the current ruling coalition does not have 2/3 majority in the Macedonian parliament. So my personal opinion is that at least at the point of ratification or changing the constitution in the parliament, we will have problems in Macedonia, and the conflict will sadly probably continue for the next period. So this is the situation where the conflicts are lingering, are not solving because of various reasons. Some of them have been presented before. The case of the country that has not really finished, not even democratic transition to begin the democratic consolidation processes.
Hello. So my name is Ovi, and I'm coming from Bangladesh. I work for an NGO which is based in UK. So my question is to Akishto. So while you were representing your slides, you were addressing the Turkish government, which is an elected government, as a regime. I don't think addressing a government as a regime is a good practice while you are addressing an elected government. So I would be asking you whether your comments or the way you are addressing a government as a regime, how do you justify that? Thank you.
Sorry, question to repeat again more slowly.
My question was, how do you justify by embracing elected government as a regime? Because you were addressing Turkish government as a regime. How do you justify that? Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. This is also really a tough question. How to evaluate Turkey is very hard from the, it depends on the viewpoint. And yeah, in a sense, the present government is really sometimes looks like can I say it's very hard to explain, but something like populistic kind of. But actually, he was gathering the voice from the citizens of Turkey, not only citizens of Turkey, citizens of refugees in Syria, and citizens of a whole like Muslim society. So that depends on the viewpoint. But in my opinion, I can justify the present government from the view side of Muslim society. Thank you.
Maybe I'd like to add some comment on this your question. Yes, the present regime, the Erdogan's government, is of course the authoritarian, but that was elected, and they changed the electoral system by the referendum. So anyway, to justify or not justify, that is not the question. This is the choice of the Turkish nationals. And sorry, the first question. Ah, yeah, yes.
My name is Emir Hasanovic. I come from the cabinet of the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Macedonia. It's always interesting to hear people talk about Turkey, albeit Macedonia is in the focus now, but that is something of interest for me. And I feel like every time we talk about Turkey's interests geopolitically, there's a lot of anxiety. I still don't understand why. And I would like to reiterate that question. Calling Turkey a regime, I don't think that is very fruitful when it comes to international relations. Democracy is important, but so is sovereignty. All the procedures were respected, and you may not like it, but calling somebody a regime is very, very serious. There are also people that don't agree with Trump. Does that make America a regime? I don't quite think so. So I think we should be careful about terminology. And I really liked your expose in terms of juxtaposing secularism as well as the rising conservatism in Turkey. But I would like to challenge you on one thing in that regard. Turkey has been trying to get into the EU for a very long time. It has been a candidate country since 1999. I don't recall a lot of other processes of integration that have been longer. The Republic of Macedonia has been a candidate country, and they're on the same level. We just recently got the dates for negotiation, and just a point of reference, in the meanwhile Bulgaria became a part of the European Union. The GDP of Turkey is what, 857 billion, and the GDP of Bulgaria is 57 billion. Where's the logic in that? And that was in a time where Turkey was much more secular and much more closer to the European values that even the Balkans as well as Europe holistically embodies. Do you think that Europe maybe pushed Turkey towards authoritarianism? And do you think that maybe with sort of fencing itself in its own comfort zone and bubble, it maybe pushed it towards values that are diametrically opposite?
Thank you. It's a very hard question.
I don't think so, because this is really hard to explain also. But Turkey, but from the side of Turkey, this is also this not dream of joining EU as a negotiation before. So the Turkey will continue to negotiation to joining the EU, but that will be totally different from before, because now the EU negotiation really connected matters of Syrian refugees. So the side is really different, but yeah. Thank you.
So that I must wrap up now. The last, not but least, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the organizer of the Bled Strategic Forum, as well as the Ljubljana University, counterpart of ours, and all the participants. I want to add one thing. To have the international conference here in Slovenia has a lot of meaning. Maybe that Slovenia is not the heart of Europe in the political, but actually here in Slovenia we can hear, we can listen many different voices. Not from Germany, not from the UK, not from France. Yeah, because of this small country, but at the same time surrounded by very different cultured countries, like Hungary, like Austria, like Italy, and like Croatia. So this is the very strong advantage of the Slovenia. So for this reason, we are so happy to have such a very fruitful opportunity to discuss the more global agenda. Thank you very much indeed.
People from Young?
Yes.
With me, please.
Oh, my jacket.